Live aus dem Dokumentationszentrum für Fluchtvertreibung Versöhnung in Berlin. Talking Humanity. Nebenschauplatz des Krieges. Bildung für Mädchen sicherstellen. In Partnerschaft mit dem Global Partnership for Education. Das Human Rights Film Festival Berlin wünscht Ihnen eine spannende Diskussion. Es begrüßt Sie Ihre heutige Gastgeberin, GPE Youth Leader Nagin Ravand.
Good evening and welcome to the talk Battles Beyond the Battlefield, Safeguarding Girls' Education, and the screening of the documentary Children of the Taliban. My name is Nagin Ravand. I'm a GPE youth leader, a Danish-Afghan football coach and student, and today we are here to talk about children of the Taliban and girls' education. Before we kick off, I would like to start off by acknowledging that we're currently receiving shocking news every other minute from all over the world, and that it can be extremely overwhelming. So we would like to thank you all the more for joining us tonight. Today we will be discussing the importance of girls' education, and we will zoom in on particularly the situation for girls in Afghanistan, a topic that is increasingly being forgotten. Since the Taliban took power in August 2021, almost 2 decades of progress have come to an abrupt end, especially for girls and for women. Female secondary school students have been denied to return to their classrooms. Women have been denied access to universities and their workplace. Only girls up to the 6th grade are being allowed to go to school. And as if Afghanistan haven't been suffering enough, the country was hit by several earthquakes a couple of days ago, lately yesterday, causing the death of over 3,000 people in the very same province my parents and I fled from 20 years ago. And to think that I could have been one of those girls under the fallen bricks makes me feel even more privileged to sit here in front of you today, thanks to my education. And that's why today we're looking at battles beyond the battlefield and the efforts to give girls access to education. This event is presented by the Human Rights Film Festival in collaboration with the Global Partnership for Education, the GPE, which I'm proudly representing today. The GPE is a unique multilateral partnership consisting of the governments of over 90 lower-income partner countries, donor countries, international organizations, civil societies, education systems, and the private sector. The GPE, as the largest education transformation fund and partnership, is helping over 90 partner countries, including fragile and conflict-affected states, transform their education systems so that every child receives an inclusive and quality basic education, especially those most often excluded, the girls. Since 2005, Germany has been a member and active partner of the GPE. I'm excited to introduce to you our panelists. It's my pleasure to introduce Zahra Nader, a dedicated activist and a prominent journalist, someone who I look up to. Zahra, born in Afghanistan and a member of the Hazara community, serves as the editor-in-chief of Zan Times, an influential woman-led newsroom in exile. She has been a vital voice in reporting on human rights issues in Afghanistan, with a particular focus on women's rights and their environments. Please also welcome Serap Altinisic, a dedicated advocate for gender equality and executive chair of Oxfam Germany. Her journey in social justice and women's rights led her through various European organizations, including Terre des Femmes and Plan International, where until joining Oxfam in February 2003, she headed the Plan International's EU office. So many amazing things these have been up to. It took my breath. And as you've all seen in the invitation, State Secretary Jochen Flaspaat from the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development was supposed to join us today, but because of an important meeting he had to cancel. He apologizes for not being here today, but I'm sure with these influential and powerful people, your voices will get through. And on the good side, we will have time for a short Q&A at the end of the panel, so you have your own chance to ask questions and comment. Before we dive into today's discussion, I would first like to know from our two panelists what role education has played in your lives. Zahra, we can start with you.
Thank you, Negin, for having me here, and thank you, everybody, for being here. It's a privilege to be sitting here, and I would start with that if I'm sitting here, it's because of the education I got. Talking about education of girls is also a very traumatic topic for me, because now millions of girls in Afghanistan do not have this right that I had growing up in Afghanistan. My first memories about education goes back when the Taliban took over Afghanistan the first time in the 1990s, when I was a young girl and my family fled to Iran. In Iran, I was an Afghan refugee where I did not have a right to education. I remember my mom taking me from one school to another, and she was begging the school principal to let me in, to only allow me to learn how to read and write. And then one after another, they said no, they didn't allow me. My mother were telling them, it's okay, we don't want a certificate, we do want nothing, we just want her to be able to read and write. And I was denied that right. So I didn't know very much what school was, but I knew whatever it was something important for my mother, who was an illiterate woman herself. She did not grow up in a place that there was a school. She did not have a chance to get education. And she wanted to give us chances that she did not have. So my memories is this understanding that I was in a place where children around me could go to school and I could not go to school. And I remember every day wishing that what would really happen if I can go to school, if I can learn how to read and write, like how world would look like to me then. And if I was able to wear the school clothes and be like everybody around me. So sometimes I was wishing that maybe if I sleep one night and wake up the other morning, be an Iranian kid, so I can go to school. And that never happened. So I was not able to go to school when I was in Iran, and I have a lots of, besides not having the right to education, I experienced a lots of racism in Iran, as there are right now. So there are hundreds of thousands of Afghans are refugees in Iran, and they are experiencing what I have experienced, and even worse now, like there's a crisis going on there where Afghans are being targeted for just fleeing to Iran and being and working there. So I remember my first happy memories was leaving Iran. It was a Monday, and we left for Afghanistan. We were coming to Kabul post-2001, and it was one of my happiest moments in life where I was like, oh my God, we are finally going home, somewhere that I belong, somewhere that I can go and get education, where I was not denied that you are not allowed to go to school. So our family settled in a suburb of Kabul, in West Kabul, where most Hazara lived. We did not have electricity, we did not have running water, so the life, we just like a small housing, people were building their houses. Our neighborhood looked like a desert then, because not many people have moved yet. There was a school near our house. It was like an hour of walk, and I and my sister were going to school. I remember those days that I was going to school. The very first day, I was holding my head up, and I was thinking, oh my God, like that feeling that nobody can tell you that you do not belong here, that you have to go back home. And then I was able to get education. I think that really, nothing else really meant for me, not having, because in Iran we had electricity, we had running water, but it didn't bother me at all, not having those access to very basic needs. I was only happy that, oh my God, I can go to school. The school I went to was not a normal school. So it was like a very muddy building, not a building, so a house, and we did not have proper classrooms. There were 10 donated by UNICEF, and in the yard of the school, they built tents where inside that tents we were studying. And I remember most of the time there was like, storm in Kabul, so it would create a pause for our class. So we had to wait for the storm to pass in order for us to go back and study. And one particular day, I remember sitting in the classroom under that tent. And then the way that you're sitting, so our class was like that. And then here was the wall. And then there was a blackboard on the wall. Where one day our math teacher was teaching us, and he was standing behind the board looking at us and explaining what he has written on the board. And suddenly a snake fall off the wall on the blackboard, and all of us standing like we're screaming, oh my God, and the teacher's like, oh, what's happening? Suddenly everybody is standing, and so finally one of us said like, there's a snake, so it takes a while to get the snake out. So it was just giving you the sense of like what it means to get education then in Afghanistan, but none of that really bothered us. The way like an hour walk, not having a classroom, it didn't mean a lot, and our class was full of children. So we didn't have, sometimes the chair that was meant for 2 students, 3 or 4 of us were sitting and sharing that chairs, because we just felt that it doesn't matter where we sit. It matters that we are able to study and get an education. So I was able to finish my school in Afghanistan, and I went to university. I studied law, but at the same time I was practicing and studying, working mostly as a journalist. And I was telling the stories of my community, the stories of what I was seeing, the lack of electricity, the busy city bus, and I was just writing about them, whatever I was seeing. Eventually I worked with the New York Times in Kabul, and later in 2017 I moved to Canada, and there I was told that as an immigrant woman it's not possible for me to be a journalist in Canada. So I went back to school and did a master in communication and culture, I liked academia. And then I studied and I started my PhD in women and gender studies. It was hard to be an immigrant woman and trying for, getting a PhD, but it was important for me. And I remember there was times that I wanted to give up, and then I was looking back and thinking that of those days where I was not allowed to go to school in Iran, where I was denied the right to education, I remember my mom crying, and I would say, it's worth it. I have to do this because to prove that, when we are allowed to get education, we can do big things. And again, it's hard because my mother was not able to go to school. And then now millions of women in Afghanistan, millions of girls are not allowed to go to school. So they will have the fate that my mother had. So it's painful for me, because I feel what I had, the privileges that I enjoyed, is now denied to millions of women and girls. And it's very much traumatizing.
So it's no longer just about the lack of pen and paper, it's about the lack of being allowed and having access to your human rights, and education wasn't really a natural part of life like it was for most of us growing up. For you. Serap, what role has education played for you in your life?
Sarah, thanks for sharing. Played a very vital role in my life. My parents are so-called Gastarbeiter. They were moving from Turkey to Germany in the 60s. They came separately, so they met each other here, and then they fall in love and married. What I was completely aware of, and what my parents always told me was, daughter, we have no capital, and we have no networks at all. The networks that we have won't be enough for you so that you might get opportunities or chances, because there is a network of people who already had education or have influential positions and roles. So they were always supporting me and encouraging me to focus on my education, because their hope was that one day I will have it better than they had in their lives. And secondly, I think education played also a vital role for me. I mean, coming from a Turkish community, we are very diverse. However, in the times of my parents, I would say it was a little less diverse in the sense of they were progressive or conservative. I would say there was a majority being more conservative than progressive. And what happened is that also through my education, I first heard things like, oh, why is she going to school? Why is she going so long to school? Because one day she will marry anyway. However, thanks to my parents, in particular my mother, I recognized the more I did my, in inverted commas, career in education, the questions changed, and they were even starting to respect, in inverted commas, me more than they did before. So they consulted for things, me, or they were asking my parents, oh, what would setup think about it? Does setup has any proposals or recommendations or any idea what we could do? Where should we go to or refer to? So that as well changed, so to say, the value that I received, because I remember I was around 8 or 9, and I was in the hall of the apartment and told my mom that I want to become the president of Germany. So forgive me, I didn't know that the chancellor has a bit more power in Germany than the president. I said, because then I will ensure that girls and boys have the same rights and chances, because I recognized that around 8 and 9 years old, there were also restrictions coming up that I shouldn't do this and that because I'm a girl and so on and so forth. So, and what I love about my mom, she was laughing and said, yes, daughter, go for it. Yeah, so education, I think, played a very vital role in my life. And I think if I would have had not the encouragement, the empowerment of my parents, but also I would say our own will, that plays, of course, a role as well. I wouldn't live the life that I live now, and I'm very grateful. I'm very happy and privileged, and yeah, and I can just say education is the best people can receive if they have not already privileged circumstances or conditions they are finding themselves due to families, due to family networks, etc.
So sometimes, even if you have opportunity, encouragement is just as important to really know the value of education and how it has the power to transform lives. Zahra, since the Taliban took power in August 2021, women have been systematically oppressed. Can you describe to us how the everyday life for women and girls in Afghanistan has changed?
Thank you for that question. I want to start with saying that it has been 792 days that women and girls in Afghanistan wake up to an inhuman and unbearable situation imposed on them by the Taliban. And that is going to be 759 days since the Taliban banned secondary school for girls. That's 299 days since the Taliban banned higher education or university for women in Afghanistan. That is 783 days since the Taliban banned women from working in public sector, and 296 days since they banned women from working in NGOs. So I want to bring your attention to just consider for a moment what it really means for all of you, and especially women in this room, to have no rights. Whatever you have built so far is taken from you. And you cannot even leave your house and go out by yourself just only to ride a taxi or go to a clinic. You have to have a man accompanying you, and that man should be your mahram, which is basically mean a blood-related relative or somebody that's very close to you, a husband, a brother. And then we are talking about the country. We have 4 decades of war, and there are millions of women who do not have such a close male relative. What it really means for them to live in Afghanistan right now. They cannot work, they cannot earn their living. Their daughters, young girls, cannot go to school just only because they happen to be women and girls, and that's their crime. And so what's going to happen really, what would really happen to them? Waking up to over 2 years, 792 days, and you see no hope, no change, no progress. And whatever you have worked so far for is all gone. So let me tell you what's happening for most of women in Afghanistan right now. So most of them, they're finding themselves in a situation that they feel they prefer killing themselves and taking their own lives rather than living under the situation. Recently, we did publish an investigative report where we looked at the rates of suicide for women, and basically we looked at the 11 provinces to see how many women are actually killing themselves. So globally, men are twice more likely to commit suicide or kill themselves than women. But in Afghanistan, we find out that more women are killing themselves than men. So in 10 of those 11 provinces, women were outnumbering the attempted suicide and also the actual suicide that led to death. Most of them were women, and most of them were very young women, school-age girls, who just could not see any other option for themselves. So I talked to UN Women in Afghanistan, and they told me that we are witnessing a moment where a growing number of women and girls see death as preferable to living under this current circumstances. So I want to give you a sense of because there's an understanding that some women are still able to work in Afghanistan. For example, women health workers are exempt from this total ban on women's work. But then how do they work? So they're allowed to work. So we did a report on where we talked to, I think it's over 30 women health workers in different provinces of Afghanistan, where we ask about the condition of their work, what they're doing, how they're working. And we find out that most of them, even though they want to work, the situation that the Taliban have created is becoming impossible to work. For example, I give you one example of a woman nurse. She was living in Kandahar province. She is divorced, and she has 3 children and living with her father, who is paralyzed. And she said that the Taliban asked us to have a mahram with you when you're coming to work, and that mahram has to stay in the hospital when you're working, and then when you're going back home, the mahram can take you. So she said, literally, I don't have anybody to accompany me as a mahram. So she went and hired a relative, a distant relative, and paid half of her salary to that relative to accompany her as a mahram to the hospital. And weeks later, the Taliban changed the condition and said, you and your mahram has to bring your IDs. And then, so if they bring their IDs, the Taliban would know that that this man is not blood related and it's not her mahram. So she just said, I stopped going to work, and I don't know where the next food for my children is going to come. Because if I go to work and the Taliban find out that I bring another man with myself and as my mahram, it's going to be impossible for me. Like they would penalize me, might put me in prison. So that's basically the situation for women, for some of the women who are still able to work. And then just imagine the condition of education. So sometimes we talk, and my colleague talk to young girls. Most of them cannot even talk. They only cry on the phone and just say, and most of those young girls, their hope, like me, was that we get an education, that we build our country, that we change the situation. It's bad. The situation is bad, but we will change it once we get education, once we are able to do something. And then they cry and say, I don't know what to do. And then we have women who are saying, I just feel I don't have any choices, especially women who are themselves breadwinner of their families. So let me give you another example. So we find out that there was a young girl going and standing outside World Food Program. I think this was also in Kandahar. And she was standing there with a bag, and whenever the food was being distributed, the sacks of aid, like some of them has a hole. So there was sometimes bean and rice would fall on the ground, and this young girl would go and collect those grains that fall on the ground. And then my colleague went and she talked to her and said, why are you not asking for help? Because this is aid distribution. This is meant for people like you. And she said, they're not giving us aid because our name is not on the list. So my colleague went to their house and interviewed her mother of what's the situation. And she said, I have been there several times and asked them that I don't have anybody working. I do not have any income. And my children are starving and we need food. And they told us that your name has to be on the list. And then when I ask who is making the list, it's mostly and often the Taliban themselves and their sympathizers. And then what they do is mostly they put the name of their relatives, the name of the people they know on the list. And then people like this woman and her children, they need to collect the grains that are falling out of the aid sacks. And then we did another reporting about how aid is being distributed. And we find out again that most of the people who is the intended receiver of this aid, they are not receiving the aid. And most of them are people and women who do not have any income, who do not have anybody who would support them. And when the Taliban banned women from working in NGOs, UN Women said that there was 11.5 million women who needed vital aid to survive. And when we don't have women aid worker working, that means that the access of this woman to aid is in a way prevented. They cannot access aid. And especially that's the worst for women with disability who cannot leave their house, who cannot go anywhere, who cannot bake. So you see the one who is most vulnerable, they are literally, they can't do anything. And we do talk with several women with disabilities who told us, in the previous government, they were able to get some sort of stipend from the government because of their disability. And then when the Taliban took over, most of them is not getting that stipend, and that mostly goes to the Taliban themselves. So that's basically a snapshot of what's taking place in the country right now.
So even the help that there is not really a help, and
is not very much reaching the population that it should be, because it's the Taliban stealing from that aid in different names. Sometimes they go and collect the aid that was distributed in the morning. They would go in the afternoon and take this back. And often they would say, we're going to use this to build the road, meaning that they would take the aid back and make the people work. And often it's like women cannot go and work. Even in agriculture, they ban women from working. So they cannot work outside. So it's mostly men who can go and work, maybe build the road, and then the same aid would be given to them as their salaries for working. That's like some of the ways that the Taliban used to use the aid.
So right now, Afghanistan is an example of a country by men, for men, by the Taliban, for the Taliban, and all the girls and women are stuck at home in between four walls. And I mean, if we spend more than 2 days in a row at home, don't we get sick of it? Don't we start fighting with the people under the same roof as us? Don't we get restless? So imagine if you don't really have a choice and you have so much to give off, but your voice is muted. Serap, in crisis situations, for example, after a natural disaster like the earthquake in Afghanistan or during wars in general, girls' education is particularly affected, and girls are more than twice as likely as boys to stop going to school. What is the reason for this? And why is the education of girls not only essential for their individual prospects in life, but for the overall well-being of a society in whole?
Yeah, that's true, and there are different reasons why in crisis situation the situation even becomes worse for girls and their access to education. Let's start with the social norms that are, so to say, impacting differently on girls and boys. Girls in general have to do more care work in comparison to their brothers or boys in their same age. Girls are also the first one who are taken out of school than their brothers, nephews, or boys in the same community, because they have to do the domestic work, they have to take care of elderly, or they have to, so to say, work for without getting paid for it. Then what we see as well is that in particular girls are impacted much higher than boys from gender-based violence in those times. I mean, in general, girls are suffering from gender-based violence more than boys, but in crisis even more. It's also that they are forced, so to say, either into prostitution, or they are also raped. And what we also, of course, see in crisis, if it comes to girls, is early forced marriages as well. It's a kind of, in inverted commas, coping mechanisms for the families, because they can't afford, so to say, the girls, their daughters anymore, and they are, so to say, married away, so that the family has less mouths to feed. And yeah, these are mainly, there are many other, we could go into detail, right? However, but these are the three big, so to say, pillars why girls in general are having less access or less education than boys worldwide, and in crisis even more. And why is it good for the well-being? I think we three, I think, are a very good example, right? To showcase that our social environment, people who are with us, so to say, can also enjoy our smartness, can learn from us, can engage with us. We are there to share our potential, to share our ideas, our perspectives, to create better solutions for humankind. And we know also from studies, for example, that in countries where we have unfortunately not one country, right, that has achieved gender equality. However, there are enough studies that showcase that when they are, where you have more gender equality, the less fragile the countries and regions are. For example, I think this is also good for peace. And when we see also currently as well how many conflicts, crises and wars we have, I'm 100% convinced if women would have the opportunity to create and lead and take decisions more than they unfortunately managed to have until now, not because they can't, just because they are held back. I'm 100% convinced we would have a more peaceful world. And it's of course, I think, good for the well-being in terms of the communities. However, I think also for the well-being of ourselves, right? For the girls and women to be your own agent, to know your rights, to feel confident and comfortable, to speak up, to ensure that your voice is heard at least, if not maybe the decisive voice, or that will be the one that always, so to say, will be guiding decisions. However, I think it's liberating for ourselves as well to know that I am confident and I'm valued equally, or I'm as much valued like boys or men.
There's a saying that goes, when you educate a man, you educate an individual, but when you educate a woman, you educate an entire nation. And I think that's words to live by, and that shows just exactly how strong women are and what they're capable of if they have the opportunity to make change and have something to say. And who run the world? Girls.
Yes.
Zahra, from your point of view, what can and should the international community, and especially Germany, do to support and stand in solidarity with the women and girls in Afghanistan, and especially with regards to education?
Thank you for that question. One point that I want to make is that I want you all to understand that what's happening in Afghanistan should not be seen only as a problem of Afghanistan, only as a problem of Afghan women. It should be seen as a global problem, a crisis for women's rights globally, because that will bring the bar low of what could be denied to women, and there's nothing the so-called international community would do. You know, like 2 years have passed and nothing has been done in terms of getting action, a collective action to respond to it, because this is a global women's rights crisis of our time, the worst that we have so far. There is a women's rights activist from Afghanistan. She has been imprisoned by the Taliban because of her role in protest. She is right now protesting in Cologne, Germany. What she is asking for is the world, Germany, to recognize gender apartheid in Afghanistan, because that would give a framework of like how do the countries engage with an apartheid state. So I think that would be one of my recommendations, that we have to listen to these women's activists. And because what's happening in Afghanistan, when like women cannot leave their house, cannot earn their living, cannot feed themselves, cannot get education, for how long can this last? Because we will not be having any women doctors, women nurses, women teachers, even these 2 jobs that the Taliban would allow when the education is banned, when women cannot study beyond grade 6. So I think that's going to be a big crisis, and it needs a collective response from the countries that at least were involved in Afghanistan in the past 20 years. They need to come together and create, in a way, a framework where they would be responding to the Taliban, because what I am seeing as a journalist is, in a way, accommodation of the Taliban in the past 2 years, because the Taliban did not ban everything from the first day they took over. Like, it started slowly. They were just seeing like how would the world respond to them. What did the world do was just a statement of condemnation that yes, we are concerned, but we are not willing to do anything to press the Taliban to say, hey, we are not, enough is enough, that we will not be standing and playing this game with you. This is about human rights, and we will not be, being pushed back. Because it's not something that you would say, okay, like it's about culture. It's not. It's about human rights. It's about women's rights. It should be seen as that. So I think this concept of gender apartheid, and also having these countries working together to pressure the Taliban to reverse some of these policies in a way that would be measurable, actionable, where it's not going to be stay only in statements. We want action, and 2 years have passed. I think the Taliban have clearly showed who they are, what they want, what kind of society they want to build, and they are going to be a threat to the world if this is also, I'm quoting from a women's rights activist who was also arrested by the Taliban. One time I was interviewing her, and she told me that the world should understand that the Taliban is like COVID-19. You cannot contain it within the borders of Afghanistan, no matter how hard you will try. It's going to be a threat to the world if the Taliban stay in power, because we know what vision they have for the world, for a society. So one thing would be that I'm asking Germany and other countries to come together and work in an actionable plan to deal with the Taliban. The least they can do is force the Taliban to reverse some of these inhuman policies. Second I can ask is that they start supporting alternative educations. There are lots of groups, communities, especially women taking the initiatives. They're running secret schools, where they would be teaching children, girls, in their own houses, like a few of them in the neighborhood, they come together and they teach and they build schools. This is one of the initiatives that I know that's happening in the country. As well, there are other initiatives like online schools. They are like, just providing the means, the internet device where these girls could study. And then connect them with like an online school where they will be able to continue their education. One thing I want to be clear here is, and some of us are worried about actually, is that if the Taliban open the school and then they Talibanize the curriculum where the children will be studying, and the world would be clapping and like jumping and saying, hey, finally the Taliban did open the school, let's recognize them, let's, give them whatever they needed. And you have to be very mindful of what kind of education are we talking about. It should be an education to the standard of the world. It should be a scientific education where they would be able to help the development of the country, not brainwashing a new generation of Afghanistan to become Taliban. We have enough, the US were saying 70,000. This 70,000 have destroyed the country. What if 5 years down the road we have millions of the Taliban? What's going to happen then? Again, it's not going to be contained in Afghanistan if it's not being taken serious and it looked about, oh, we're tired of Afghanistan, we don't want to talk about it. Let's put it there and let's find a way to deal with the Taliban. No, it's not only about Afghanistan. It's about the new generation that's growing up. And the Taliban are building thousands of schools in Afghanistan right now. The education system is shut down where they used to study getting scientific, standard curriculum, and they're studying extremists, and in a way being taught the Taliban's ideology of how a society should be, and it's all in terms of what's halal and what's haram and who should be killed and who, this rhetoric. And then one of the requests or recommendation I can make is creating a pathway for supporting those who are really at risk, like women protesters, like women activists who actually protested the Taliban in the past 2 years, and their lives are at risk. They do not have any place to go. Some of them are it's a year or over a year that they're stuck in Pakistan. And look at the situation of Pakistan and Iran. Afghan refugees do not have any place to go. And because I was a refugee in Iran, I've been very much traumatized. I cannot even look the videos of how they're being beaten. Their house is being attacked because they happen to be Afghans. So the situation is not good, and I hope this country, as they welcome Ukrainians to their countries and open their borders and their doors, I hope that they can do, at least for some of these vulnerable Afghans who really, really need help, and give them a safety here in their country. Then one of the requests I want to make is that there's earthquake happening And we had before that when the Taliban take over, everything sort of collapsed and 95% of the population do not have anything to eat. So we want the aid to go in Afghanistan, but we want the system to be created where they can monitor where this aid is going, because nobody wants the aid to go to the Taliban. So there should be a system that clearly be able to monitor that, and also to document human rights violations that's taking place in Afghanistan right now. Because what's the Taliban good at is right now is only suppressing the people, killing the people, torturing them, and arresting them. And that's happening daily. We have right now two women activists who only protested for their rights. They are in prison, and their families didn't know where they are. We have journalists who have been in prison for months, and we have not heard of like what is their crime, what they have done to deserve months of imprisonment, and of course torture. So that's basically what's happening, and I'm hoping that this countries would be able to help and create a way to monitor the aid, as well as monitor and document human rights violations that are taking place in Afghanistan right now.
So when aid is needed and when help is needed in the conflict-affected countries like Afghanistan, we need people to go all the way and to really follow up on the help. Is the money getting in the right hands? Are the schools teaching in the right subjects? Is the food being delivered to those who need it? And for the aid to not just be numbers in some government plan, because we are really talking about lives at risk. Serap, coming from an organization that deeply cares about equality and social justice, Oxfam, and that puts gender equality at the heart of its work, which responsibility do you think that the international community has, especially Germany, to promote educational opportunities for all girls and boys globally?
Thanks, Zahra. Incredible how you showcased how many avenues there are and what we have to be really sensitive about. And I really hope that you also have the opportunity to meet the State Secretary, or at least I would recommend that we send him, so to say, this panel conversation in the hope that he can push also for exactly the proposals and recommendations that you have made. I would on the top say, for example, GPE, as you know, Germany, you were mentioning it, was one of the countries supporting it. However, Oxfam with other organizations has calculated and showcased what would be the fair share of Germany contributing, so to say, to the budget. And unfortunately, Germany is not fulfilling its contribution. It should be 110 million every year in the coming years. It's only about 50 million to 75. It is varying. And also and if it comes to aid, because humanitarian aid or crisis are again it's something else there. You know, in the moment you have to, so to say, ensure that the people who are suffering that we are saving lives and that they get access quickly to shelter and food. However, if it comes then to the continuation, I absolutely agree that it has to be with conditions. Without conditionality, I think it most probably won't implement it in a manner that would also benefit, in particular, girls and young women in relation to education and access also then to higher education, or also informal trainings and informal education. So this is one ask that we would have, and think Germany has to have its fair share. Secondly, what we have seen over the many years of our work is that sometimes countries prefer, so to say, private education or supporting, so to say, private education in comparison to public education. And our research and studies showcase that this is, so to say, not opening the doors more, so to say, for marginalized groups or for girls. It's so to say, becoming even more unequal. So we are also demanding that the infrastructure and the public infrastructure has to be built up to ensure that there are equal chances and opportunities in regards to access and education for girls and young women.
Thank you so much for your insightful answers, both of you. It's been really inspiring. And some moments before we move on, I would like to open the floor for questions for our panelists. So feel free to raise a hand and we will get over to you with a mic and you can ask us some questions.
I wonder what we can do, because we obviously we cannot get all the women out of Afghanistan that are living under these conditions, but we cannot go into Afghanistan because I think then our life is threatened. So I really, right now, I don't know what to do to help.
So thank you for that question. I think there are things that could be done without, like, it's absolutely, I agree, like, there's no way to think of, like, get the entire population out or even the entire women of the country, just like, it's impossible. However, there are possibilities of, like, supporting some of this women, some of the people who, because of the work, because of who they are, their lives are at risk. So what I'm saying is opening that space, supporting that some resettlement of some of those people whose lives are at risk. That I think maybe Germany could do. The other thing that could be done is supporting, as I said, like supporting alternative education for girls and women in Afghanistan by providing the resources. And also supporting some of women-led groups that are working either outside Afghanistan or inside the country to be able to continue their work. For example, the organization that we created is called Zan Time. Zan means woman in our Farsi Dari language. And Zan Time, so basically we started this to report and bring attention and raise awareness about what's taking place in Afghanistan in terms of human rights, and particularly to women in the worst country to be women, because we are sure that if you do not know what's taking place, it's unlikely that you would take an action to raise awareness or do something to change the situation. And then, you know, like this providing alternative education it could be empowering, you know, like online education or supporting groups that are organizing secret schools that are going underground to continue the education. So they need resources to continue, because for how long could the hungry volunteer to provide resources? When they don't have, when their means run out, they cannot continue doing this. So I think empowering those spaces and also looking through ways. I think if we are thinking about the governments, I think there are things that the government could do. Most of the time when I talk to some of representatives, they feel powerless and say like, oh, the Taliban are not changing, we cannot do. I think there are things could be done. For example, putting more Taliban's leaders under ban, and also pressuring some of the countries that are empowering the Taliban, because if they are working with the Taliban and encouraging and promoting the Taliban agenda, of course they have some power on the Taliban, and that could be done, or at least reverse some of the inhuman policies like women not being allowed to go to school or women not being allowed to work. So I think there are things that could be done, but I think it's like, first, it cannot be done individually, maybe by one party, but when everybody comes together, I think there are things that the Taliban wants from the world. And it needs a very concrete, clear, actionable decisions about what we are going to do. And again, it should not be seen as, okay, like this is Afghanistan and we don't know how to deal with the Taliban. It should be seen as a women's rights crisis, worst women's rights crisis of our time. And then how do we respond to worst women's rights crisis of our time? We just remain silent and say, okay, we cannot do anything, because this could just happen in another country. And then what? There's going to be no action because they're going to be another kind of the Taliban in maybe another part of the world. So I think we have to think about ways that we have to take action. I'm a journalist. I might not be able to give an examples of how that action might look like, but I'm sure there are ways to press the Taliban where it hurts, where it's effective.
First of all, thank you so much for being so brave and speaking up about all of these horrendous things that are happening. I was working previously for a social democratic parliamentarian who is sitting as a head of the Afghanistan Enquête Commission, and I know for a fact that they're obviously working really, really hard to ensure that there are proper solutions and policy recommendations by the end of 2025, the legislative period. But I also know for a fact that my parliamentarian was also a human rights activist, worker, as you want to say it. But whenever we try to do something about single circumstances, about Iran and a lot of people that were being held hostage, there was always the foreign ministry, but also like other parties that were in the way, and that called out the security issues that we have and the economic issues that we have that obviously are set in the forefront before human rights matters. So I think it's probably for the best to find ways to give means to Afghan women over there, but I think it's unfortunately always prioritized differently when it comes to human rights, that it's always first economic and then maybe security on the side, as we can see right now in Israel and Gaza as well, and then human rights. And I think it's important to keep up that work and to have a voice, but that's also something that we always have to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I also, like in terms of these countries are already providing support for humanitarian crisis, or at least have done it in the past 2 years. But we have to be understanding that for how long these countries can support humanitarian help in Afghanistan, for how long can they give us the, like the money that goes in. We have to be understanding that this situation is there because the Taliban do not allow half of the population to earn their income. So as long as the Taliban do not allow them, we are going to have this humanitarian crisis where people cannot afford to eat. So I think we have to understand that negotiation of between like, okay, this is economic, so we can do this part, but we cannot do this. I think there are ways, if the will is there, I'm sure there could be things done.
But I also think like in that matter, you should believe and understand that it's an investment. So sure, the funding will not last forever, but if you use that to invest in education, it will be something you're investing in the future, in the girls and in the women that will be developed and will be able to help solve these challenges with economy and with security and so on. So no matter what, education seems to solve every problem somehow, because you give power to half the population that stood with nothing. Thank you so much for answering and asking amazing questions tonight. Thank you for all your insights and your comments. A lot has been said about the power of girls' education, not only for the individual, but for the prosperity, the peacefulness, and the resilience of societies as whole. As you walk away from tonight's event and you reflect on today's discussions, it's essential to remember that the battle for girls' education is not confined to any single region or nation. According to UNICEF, 129 million girls worldwide remain out of school without education and face multiple barriers, even if they have the opportunity to go to school. These include distance to school, cultural norms and practices, school-related gender-based violence, and forced marriages. I'm asking all of you tonight to please take a stand, because not doing anything is also taking a stand. They say knowledge is power because information is liberating. So please help us liberate the millions of Afghan girls. Please help making sure that their future isn't determined by the odds, because the odds will always be against them. Help them determine their own future. Give them a chance by giving them a book, a pen, and a paper so that they can read, write, and raise their own voices. Thank you. In a moment, we will start the second part of tonight's event, the screening of the movie Children of the Taliban, a documentary that will transport us to the lives of 4 children in Kabul after the Taliban regained power in 2001. 2 boys with fathers in the Taliban and 2 girls, both 9 years old, that are no longer in school, but working on the street to provide for their families. The portraits of these 2 girls powerfully illuminates the challenges they face, the resilience they embody, and the urgency of safeguarding the right to education. Thank you so much, Zahra and Serap. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.